Detective Daniel Cross had always trusted his instincts. After 16 years in law enforcement, he learned that the smallest signals, the flicker of an eye, the tightening of a jaw, a pause before an answer, often made the difference between saving a life and missing something catastrophic. And today, his gut screamed louder than it had in years. He was behind the wheel of Bus 27, a temporary duty he'd volunteered for as part of an undercover child trafficking sting. At 10:16 a.m., the bus lurched to a stop at the Grand Avenue terminal, and that's when he saw them. A man in a worn gray hoodie stepped on board, tugging a little girl behind him. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her tiny frame swallowed by an oversized red sweatshirt. Her hands were hidden deep inside the sleeves, as though she wanted to disappear. Her pale blonde hair was a tangled mess, and she moved hesitantly, like every step required permission. The man had a lean, wiry frame. His angular face was shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. He wore the hoodie despite the muggy California heat, and his free hand clenched and unclenched in quick succession. His fingers tightened around the little girl's wrist, not the gentle grasp of a father, but more like a leash. Daniel didn't shift in his seat, but his eyes tracked them both in the rearview mirror. Something was wrong. The man dragged the child to the very back of the bus, planting himself between her and the rest of the world. His arms stretched across the back of the seat, not protective but possessive, blocking. Daniel's pulse ticked up. He'd seen this before. Kids didn't act like that around their parents. Fathers didn't yank their daughters through crowds like duffel bags. And little girls didn't fold into themselves like shadows. He closed the bus doors and eased back into traffic, calling out, "Next stop, Pine Market." No response. As the bus rattled on, he glanced at the mirror again. The man leaned toward the girl, whispered something, and she flinched. A subtle jerk of her shoulder, barely noticeable, but to Daniel, it was a scream. Then the crackle in his earpiece. Amber Alert. A 6-year-old girl. Last seen wearing an oversized red sweatshirt. Possible abduction. Suspect, male, late 30s. Last seen near Grand Avenue. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The air thickened around him. His throat felt dry. Oversized sweatshirt. 6 years old. A man in his 30s. The pieces snapped together in his mind with horrifying clarity. But he couldn't act yet. If he gave anything away, the suspect might panic, or worse, hurt the girl. Daniel breathed slow and steady. Strategy first. He needed to confirm before he made a move. A slight adjustment of the mirror gave him a better view of the girl. That's when he saw it. Her stomach. At first, he thought it was the sweatshirt bunching up. But as she shifted slightly, he noticed the unnatural bulge beneath the fabric. It wasn't the soft roundness of baby fat. It was rigid, swollen in a way that made his skin crawl. Daniel's mind raced. Malnutrition? Medical issues? Or something far more sinister? He needed help. Quietly, he thumbed the intercom. "Attention, folks. We've got a routine maintenance stop coming up. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes." The bus pulled to a slow halt at the curb. He saw the man tense immediately. His fingers twitched on the seat. His leg bounced like a jackhammer. Daniel stood, calm and casual, just doing a sweep. Safety protocol. The passengers muttered, mildly annoyed, but stayed seated. Row by row, Daniel made his way to the back, pretending to check under seats. When he knelt near the second-to-last row, he heard it, a whisper so faint it was almost nothing. "Help me." The girl. 3 words that cracked the air open like thunder. Daniel didn't react. Couldn't. He nodded, barely, and turned toward the man. "Sir," he said, his voice neutral. "Mind standing for a moment? Need to check under your seat." The man's head snapped up. His eyes darted to the front, then back at Daniel. His face pale, his jaw clenched. "I didn't see anything," the man rasped. "Standard procedure," Daniel replied, offering a polite smile. The man rose slowly, dragging the girl to her feet. His grip turned white-knuckled on her wrist. Daniel kept his breathing steady, but his pulse hammered in his ears. The man wasn't going to let them off easily. Daniel's fingers brushed the panic button on his belt. A silent distress signal shot to dispatch. Backup was on the way. He just had to keep them there. As Daniel stepped back toward the front, the man's voice barked, "We're getting off." Daniel turned. "Sorry, sir. We'll need to wait until." I said now. The man yanked the girl toward him, harder this time. She stumbled, her face screwing up in pain. Daniel's hands curled into fists. He had 3 minutes, maybe less, before his team arrived. But watching the panic build in the man's wild eyes, Daniel knew he was running out of time. Then the man reached into his pocket. Daniel's breath caught. Not a phone, a knife. A rusted switchblade flicked open with a sharp click. Its jagged edge gleamed under the bus's harsh fluorescent lights. "Open the damn doors," the man snapped. Daniel's heart thudded in his throat. He took a slow step forward, his hands in plain sight. "Okay," he said softly, "but you need to let go of her first." The man shook his head, tightening his grip. "You don't want to hurt her," Daniel said. "Let's do this easy." For a moment, something flickered in the man's expression. Hesitation. Daniel lunged. His hand clamped around the man's wrist, twisting sharply. The knife clattered to the floor as the man cried out. Daniel drove him forward, slamming his face against the seat pole. "Run!" Daniel barked. The girl hesitated for a heartbeat, then bolted. Daniel's team burst through the bus doors a second later, weapons drawn. They wrestled the man to the ground and cuffed him. Daniel turned to the girl, who was already being ushered toward an ambulance. As she moved, her sweatshirt lifted just enough for him to see it again. Her stomach, not swollen, stitched. A fresh surgical incision ran jagged across her abdomen, the skin raw and inflamed. Daniel's world tilted. This wasn't just an abduction. They had implanted something inside her. What they found. At St. Mercy Hospital, Daniel paced the ER hallway as Dr. Priya Malhotra emerged from the trauma room. "What is it?" Daniel demanded. Dr. Malhotra hesitated. "A device. Metallic. Embedded near a liver. It's transmitting." Daniel's blood turned cold. "A tracker." "No," she said, her voice tight. "It's a receiver." As Daniel processed those words, the hospital lights flickered. Rachel Ward, the FBI agent he'd worked with years ago, stormed through the door. "You called me," she said briskly. "Why?" Daniel gestured toward the trauma room. "Because we're out of time." The countdown. The hospital went into lockdown. Rachel's cyber unit traced the signal. "It's not sending anything," Agent Ward said. "It's waiting." "For what?" "We don't know." Then Annie spoke again. "My daddy said if it breaks, they come." Daniel's throat dried. "Who's they?" Annie's tiny voice, the men in suits. Moments later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the hospital. Men in black suits filed out, silent, deliberate. At their head, a man named Victor Harlow, who introduced himself as Department of Defense. "She's an asset," Harlow said. "She comes with us." Daniel's fists clenched. "Over my dead body." The power went out, and then they came. The escape. Rachel and Daniel grabbed Annie and ran. They drove through the city, the black SUVs in pursuit. No matter where they turned, the suits found them. They reached an old bridge and gunned it, crashing across before blowing the bridge behind them. They gained minutes. Not enough. Annie's condition worsened. In the back seat, Rachel cut through the stitches as the sky above them churned with metallic shapes descending. Inside Annie's body, they found it. A metallic sphere, humming with energy. Rachel pulled it free. The world paused, then exploded. The war begins. Daniel shielded Annie as a pulse of energy ripped through the trees. Victor Harlow stood over them, untouched. "You've started something you can't stop," Harlow said. Daniel rose to his feet, Annie in his arms. "We'll see." From that moment forward, it wasn't just about saving Annie. It was about stopping them. And it was only the beginning.